In this lesson, we're going to learn the different ways that plants can respond. And whenever a plant responds, of course, it's got to be by growth. They either grow or it could stop their growth. So to grow or not to grow is what is going to be, trying to think of the right word, it's how plants are going to respond to different stimuli. Growth in plants can result in the increase of length or the increase of thickness. So it's just as we can grow taller and we can grow wider. And that's what plants do as well, taller or wider. These areas of growth you need to know are called meristems. So whenever there's a growth area in a plant, that area is called meristems. Now if growth is going on, think about what we've studied in the past. What process produces more cells? A cell making more cells. That's cell division. And what goes on in cell division? Mitosis. And so whenever you have an area of meristems, you're going to have a lot of cell growth. So you're going to see a lot of cell division, the mitosis, and the different phases that we studied. Meristems are located near the tips of the stems and the roots, which would be the growing longer, or between a plant's xylem and phloem, which would be growing wider. They have two different names. Apical, think of the apex of something, the tip, the top. Apical meristems are the ones at the tip of the roots and stems, which is going to be lengthening, growth of length. Lateral means sides. So lateral meristems is going to be between the xylem and the phloem. And it's going to be what's producing bigger growth in the thickness or the width of the plant. Here's showing you just the tips. So this is apical. On the left there you have the leaf bud. So that's at the tip of a stem. And then on the right you have the root. And remember, when we looked for cell mitosis, we looked under the root cap. And if you look under the root cap there, you can see it says root apical meristems. And that's where you would see a lot of the cell division. And look at this diagram, because it's very good showing you that the lateral meristems are between the xylem and the phloem. So they're going to produce more cells and grow in width. Now a stimulus is what we call some factor that can cause a response. There's things that we will respond to. Like a stimulus of light. We do not respond the same way as a plant does. A plant responds to the stimulus of light by growing toward it or growing away from it. We respond when we go into a bright light. Our pupils will respond by getting smaller. Or if we shut the lights off, our pupils will respond by getting larger. So that's how we respond to the stimulus of light. So stimuli, which is plural of stimulus, are any changes in an organism's environment that causes a response. And we have some chemical stimuli and we have environmental stimuli. We're going to look at the chemical stimuli first. And they're produced by hormones. We have hormones too. Plants have hormones. We have different hormones. A hormone from a plant will not affect a human. A hormone from a human will not affect a plant. But hormones taken from one plant to another can affect them. Hormones are one way a plant growth is controlled. Hormones are chemical substances. They are made by a plant in a certain area. Then they travel by the phloem and the xylem to go to another area where they're going to have the effect upon the plant by stimulating the plant to divide, to enlarge, or even to stop growing. So there's hormones to start the growth and hormones to stop the growth. You need to know a few of the major hormones, and one major plant hormone is called auxin. Auxin is a plant growth hormone produced in the growing tips of plants. And what they're going to do is they cause the cells that are on the darker side, in other words, the cells that are away from the light, they cause them to elongate. So when they're getting longer and the other side that is toward the light is not getting longer, it causes the stem or the leaf to bend, and to bend towards the light. Another plant hormone is ethylene. It's actually a gas that's produced. So the plant hormone ethylene helps stimulate the ripening of fruit. Ethylene is a gas that can be produced by fruits, seeds, flowers, and leaves. And we're going to look at man then can use the use of these hormones to control when the fruit's going to ripen. Now look at the difference between the grapes on the left and the grapes on the right. The grapes on the right, man used another plant hormone called gibberellins. And gibberellins produce increased cell division and elongation, and you can see much bigger grapes compared to a clump of grapes or a cluster of grapes there on the left. There's another plant hormone called cytokinins, and it's at the root tips are what produce this hormone, and it too is going to go around to the plant and cause plant cell division, growth apically or laterally, and then it's also one that will slow down the aging process of fruits and flowers. So if you want to keep something for a longer period of time so it doesn't ripen real fast, like if they're transporting fruit from one state to another or from a country to here, they would need to control that, and they would with hormones, and this one, cytokinins. So here's an example that man will use this knowledge of plant hormones to make it easier to grow their crops, also to control them. And so man now has the capability of producing seedless fruit. And they keep working on more that they try to get to be seedless. Now the other kind of stimuli is what we call environmental stimuli. And this area it is known as tropism. Tropism is the growth responses of plants to their environment, growing either toward it or away from it. A couple of other definitions that I think are good to look at are on the slide here. A plant's directional growth, toward or away, response to a physical stimulus. The growth of plants in response to external stimuli. And if you think about the stimuli that may affect a plant, right off the bat you should be able to think of light, we just talked about that, and water. Those are the ones that are the commonly remembered one. But we're going to look at several different types of tropism. Now remember, whenever you have the plant growing, or a plant part growing toward the stimulus, toward light, toward water, toward chemicals, whatever, that's called positive tropism. And whenever the reaction is the growth away from the stimulus, that is called negative tropism. So there are 5 kinds of tropism based upon what that environmental stimulus is, that physical stimulus. Phototropism is in response to light, growing toward it or away from it. Gravitropism is a response of growing toward gravity, toward the center, that pull to the center of the earth, or growing away from it. Thigmo is probably going to be the harder one to remember, but thigmotropism is a plant's response to touch. Chemo should be easy, chemochemicals. Chemotropism, plant's response to chemicals. Hydro has to do with water, like, the hydroelectric. And hydrotropism is a plant's response to water. So here's some examples you can see, and we're going to go through each one. Here's some phototropism, and that's when a plant responds to light. If it grows toward the light, then it is called positive phototropism. So if you think about the plant, what part of the plant is growing toward light? And that is going to be the stem and the leaves. But at the same time, the roots are growing away from the light. So the roots would be exhibiting negative phototropism. Then when we look at gravitropism, it's just the opposite. Growing towards the center of the earth is not the stem and the leaves. They're growing away from the center of the earth. So that would be negative gravitropism. And then the roots are growing toward the center of the earth. So that's positive geotropism or gravitropism. It used to be called geotropism. Here's a good example. We were, remember, doing the one with the lima beans and placing the hilum in different directions to see if that's going to affect where the plant grows and where the stem grows. And the same kind of experiment has been done with corn, and you can see the result there of placing the corn in different positions, and what happens? The roots are going to grow toward the center of the earth, no matter where you put the hilum or the seed. If you take a plant and you tip it over, the leaves are going to start and the stem is going to start going up towards the light. And if you look at the roots and take the roots out of that pot, the roots are going to be changing direction and moving towards the center of the earth. Thigmotropism is a plant's response to touch. Positive thigmotropism toward the touch, negative thigmotropism away from the touch. And when we get into the touch, there's actually special structures that a plant would have that responds to touch. And right here, these are called tendrils. They're like little vines that wrap around things. Morning glories, if you ever see them, they can grow like on a fence because it has tendrils. There's certain beans that will grow up poles because they have tendrils. And those tendrils are what wrap around the object and then help it to grow up an object. And then there's also the Venus flytrap, where an insect gets in there, and if you see those little hairs, just moves one of those little hairs, and that trap shuts, and it's got the insect trapped in there. And that's response to touch. Chemotropism is a plant's response to chemicals, positive toward the chemicals, negative away. Hydro is toward water. And what grows toward water? The organ of the plant that does the absorbing of the water, the roots. So the roots have positive hydrotropism, whereas the stem and the leaves have negative. Now, plants and light. Light's very important, as you know, to plants, but we're going to learn a few more things about the relationship between plants and light. There are two characteristics of light that are very significant for the growth of a plant. One is intensity. Now think about what's intensity. Intensity is the strength. How bright is that light? Now when a plant is not grown in light, such as the plant on the left, those two plants are actually beans, lima beans. The one on the right was planted in light with light, and then the one on the left was planted in darkness. And we saw this even in our own soil with people who put seeds in it, and then it's been under and in that garbage can with a lid on it, open it up, and then you have this what's called etiolated grass. On the left there's an etiolated lima bean plant. And it does affect the growth, very much so. And when there's no light, you're going to see real paleness. You're not going to see much green at all. Usually you only see yellow and white. And then you're going to see where the stems are real long and spindly, small in diameter. And the leaves are going to be further apart, and they're going to be real pale. That's an etiolated plant, grown in the absence of light. The other characteristic that is important for plant growth is duration. And duration is how long the plant is exposed to light. And it is the chief factor that affects the flowering of plants. Now we have phototropism, which we just talked about, but there's also another photo word in response to light, and that's in response to duration, and it's called photoperiodism. It's a plant's response to the number of hours of darkness or the number of hours of light, daylight. And it's that intensity and that length of day that's going to affect, usually it's the blooming, the producing the flowers. Some plants can accurately measure this length of light and darkness to within minutes, and so they will precisely only bloom at the right time of the year because God built that into their DNA. There are 3 different types of photoperiodism, talking about their response to duration of light. And by the titles, you can probably guess what's the exposure to light or the exposure to darkness. Short day plants, long day plants, and neutral day plants. Or your book calls it, and some other books call it, day neutral plants. Same thing. So short day plants, that means the day is going to be short. So what's the night going to be? The night's going to be long. So plants that flower when exposed to less than 12 hours of sunlight, or they require 12 or more hours of darkness in order to bloom. So that's when the days are going to be short and the nights are going to be long. Now some people think that the days and nights are exactly the same every night, and that's not true. And hopefully when you studied last year in 6th grade about earth science, then you studied about these time changes and why we have time changes. And what's the longest day of the year for us? The first day of summer. And in the first day of summer, you have more daylight and less night than any other day of the year. So what happens then after you start going towards the fall? The days are getting a little bit shorter and a little bit shorter until you reach then the first day of fall. Now that's called an equinox. It's called autumnal equinox. Equinox means equal, and that's equal day and equal night, meaning 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness. Then as you approach around Christmas time, what's happening? The days are still getting shorter and shorter until you have the shortest day of the year, which is the first day of winter. Then the days are going to get a little bit longer every single day till you get to spring, which is called vernal equinox, and that is where 12 hours and 12 hours. And then it's going to lengthen until you get to the first day of summer. And that happens, and that is one thing that will affect the blooming or not blooming of a plant. To bloom or not to bloom? That is the question. So here's some examples of some short day plants. Chrysanthemums, we commonly refer to them as mums, and corn, which are growing, strawberries, apples, soybeans, violet, ragweed. And what's pictured there on the right is ragweed, which gives a lot of us hay fever. So they flower naturally out of doors in the early spring or late summer and fall because they need short days and longer nights. Now, a long day plant requires a lot more exposure or duration of sunlight and less of darkness. So plants that flower when exposed to less than 10 to 12 hours of darkness, they're called long day. So they need more than 12 hours of light. So they bloom when the days are longer and the nights are shorter. And generally they're going to flower during the late spring and summer. And some examples: clover, gladiolus is what is pictured there, sunflowers, beets, lettuce, your different grains like oat and barley, oats and barley. Now neutral day or day neutral plants, they could care less about the duration of light. It does not matter to them how many hours of sunlight we have or darkness, but something else does matter to them. So day-neutral plants flower when they reach maturity and the environmental conditions are right. Environmental conditions meaning other than sunlight and darkness. So they flower independently of photoperiodism. They bloom whenever conditions are right, and here's what affects them: moisture and temperature. So you need to know that. That's the two key environmental conditions that affect the blooming of neutral day plants. Temperature, moisture. Here's a good example there. That's cotton, which is a crop that is grown here in Georgia. So day neutral or neutral day plants, they flower continuously as long as the temperature and the moisture are okay. If they're favorable, they can grow anytime. And tomatoes, dandelions, hybrid roses, beans, your lima bean is a day neutral, zinnias, and cotton. And so plant nurseries can trick flowers, like when they need a lot of chrysanthemums for like the rose parade and stuff like that, because that's a common flower that is used. They have to trick it. And how do they do that? They have a nursery, and in that nursery they can control the lighting. They can make it darker for longer hours, or they can make it lighter by turning on the lights more. So they control that and can get them to bloom at the right time when they need them, just like the poinsettias that we need at Christmas time. And here's a great chart showing you the comparison of the three types of photoperiodism.